At precisely 5 o'clock, the grandfather clock in the front room stopped. I don't mean it slowed, faltered, or groaned like a dying horse. It just froze. The minute hand quivered like it had been caught sneaking a cigarette and then stayed there, pointing east as if it had all the time in the world. The pendulum gave up mid-swing. You wouldn't think a clock giving up on its job could ruin a man's day, but you don't live with Nero Wolfe. Archie. His voice came rolling from the office, thick and damp like a cellar wall. The clock? Yes, sir, I called back, already imagining Fritz crossing himself in the kitchen like we'd lost a family member. Stopped cold. 5 on the dot. I was leaning over the thing with a look I reserve for hostile witnesses when the doorbell went off like a fire alarm. That in itself was an event. 5 o'clock is the sacred time of Wolfe's beer, and nothing short of a bomb raid interrupts him. Beer deliverymen are scheduled earlier. Clients don't dare. Even Lily Rowan has learned better. I crossed to the door, braced for a telegram, a package, or maybe Inspector Kramer practicing new ways to annoy Wolfe. What I got was a woman I'd never seen before, holding a thin brown envelope like it was an unexploded grenade. "Mr. Goodwin?" she asked, though the nameplate on the bell should have told her. "That depends," I said. "If you're delivering bills, he's out. If you're delivering checks, come in and sit down." She didn't crack a smile, which was a pity, because she had one that would have done well under better circumstances. Tall, mid-30s, nerves bundled tight under a grey suit that screamed respectable office rather than high society. Her eyes, though, weren't office eyes. They were eyes that had seen something and weren't done seeing it. "I need Mr. Wolfe." She lifted the envelope like proof of existence. "Immediately." Now, there are 2 things Nero Wolfe hates more than interruptions at beer time. Interruptions at beer time that come with urgency. Still, something in the way she gripped that envelope, fingers trembling just enough to register, made me step back. "Come in," I said. "But don't say I didn't warn you if he decides to treat you like a misdelivered circular." She moved past me into the hall, glancing once at the grandfather clock as if the stopped hands had been her doing. I led her into the office, where Wolfe sat in his oversized throne of a chair, lifting his glass of beer to eye level like he expected it to confess. "Pfui," he muttered, seeing us. "Another." "This one's breathing," I told him. "And she's got a package." He set the glass down. "Madame, I'm at my beer." Her voice cracked. "Mr. Wolfe, this can't wait. It's about a betrayal, at exactly 5 o'clock. That got his eyes open a sliver wider. He hates coincidence like I hate unbalanced ledgers. "Betrayal," he said, as if the word tasted sour. She nodded. "My name is Helen Bristow. My husband is secretary to a publishing magnate. He was supposed to meet me today at 5 at the corner of Madison and 36th. He didn't come. Instead, she laid the envelope on Wolfe's desk with a snap. This was delivered to me. No return. No signature. I slid it open with a thumbnail, ignoring Wolfe's glare at the impropriety. Inside was a single sheet of notepaper with 3 typed words. "You were betrayed." No address, no explanation. Just that. Helen Bristow's hands clutched her skirt like she was holding herself together. "I think my husband is in danger." Wolfe leaned back, folding his lips over his displeasure. "Madame, people declare themselves betrayed daily. Husbands, wives, business associates. The frequency dulls the novelty." But at the exact moment that clock stopped, 5 o'clock, she pressed, I felt it. I'll give her this. She had timing. You don't march into Wolfe's office at beer hour with a coincidence like that unless you want the big man's brain engaged. He closed his eyes for a second, reopened them, and sighed as though civilization itself had betrayed him. "Archie," he said, "details." That was my cue to get her talking. I pulled out the notebook, settled into my routine, and started with the basics. Husband's name, employer, schedule. Turned out the guy was Julian Bristow, personal secretary to one Horace McKellar, head of a publishing house known more for family feuds than family values. She swore Julian had no enemies, no debts, no extracurricular hobbies that might involve gunfire. But her eyes twitched left when she said it, and my inner jury filed a note. "What makes you think," I asked, "that your husband's failure to meet you is a betrayal instead of, say, a subway delay or a sudden need for a dentist?" Her lips thinned. "Because last week he told me he'd discovered something wrong, something he wasn't sure he should tell me. And then yesterday he asked me—" She broke off, glancing at Wolfe. "He asked me to trust him. That's not Julian. He always tells me everything." Wolfe made a noise like a walrus disapproving of the tide. Trust is often requested when one is about to violate it. That didn't do wonders for her composure, but it nailed the flavor of the thing. We were about 3 questions into the husband's office routine when the phone rang. I picked it up. A voice I didn't know, low and hurried, whispered, "Tell Helen Bristow she was right, and tell her 5 o'clock was only the beginning." Then the line went dead. I replaced the receiver slowly, keeping my face blank. Wolfe's eyes narrowed, reading me like a front page. Helen Bristow leaned forward, searching my expression. "Well?" Wolfe asked. "Nothing," I said. "Just the usual wrong number. Because sometimes in this business, you save the reveal for maximum effect, and 5 o'clock, apparently, wasn't done betraying us yet." I put the receiver down like it was made of glass, though my fingers itched to crush it. Wolfe's eyes tracked me the way a hawk watches a rabbit that thinks it's clever. Helen Bristow's gaze bounced between us, her knuckles white against her skirt. "Nothing," I said again, casual as gin at midnight. "A wrong number." Wolfe grunted. The man can pack a week's worth of suspicion into one grunt. "Pfui, spare me." He lifted his beer, tasted it, and set it down with more force than it deserved. "Mr. Goodwin, either you were struck temporarily deaf, or you think withholding information from me is a service to humanity." I shot him my best innocent smile. I'll admit, humanity wasn't exactly top of my list. Helen looked ready to claw answers out of me, but Wolfe intervened. "Madame, control yourself. Mr. Goodwin will disgorge at my convenience, not yours." That calmed her about as much as you'd expect, which is to say, not at all. She shifted forward in her chair, eyes burning holes into me. "Please, was it Julian?" I leaned back against the edge of Wolfe's desk and let a slow beat drag out, just to see if her nerves would snap. They didn't. She held steady, trembling but stubborn. That was the kind of spine that either keeps a marriage strong or gets it killed. "It wasn't Julian," I said finally. "But it was about him. A voice. Low, hurried. Told me to tell you that you were right, and that 5 o'clock was only the beginning." Her breath hitched sharp enough to cut glass. Then he is in danger." "Or you are," I pointed out. The note could go either way. Wolfe had shut his eyes like a man listening to Bach on the radio. "Don't let the fat and the closed lids fool you." He was parsing every syllable and shoving it into the slots of that iron filing cabinet he calls a brain. "Archie," he said at last, "summon Mr. Bristow here. Tonight." Helen's voice cracked. "I told you, he's missing. Pfui, no man disappears in Manhattan without leaving footprints in butter. Mr. Goodwin will find him." He waved a hand, dismissing the impossible as though it were a bad soufflé. That was my cue. I slipped the note into an envelope of my own and tucked it into my jacket. "Fine. I'll start with his office. Publishing magnates usually have someone still pushing paper after hours. If he left early, maybe someone saw why." Helen half rose. "I'll come with you." "No," Wolfe and I said in chorus. For different reasons, of course. Mine was that dragging along a nervous wife is like wearing a neon sign on your back. Wolfe's reason was that he doesn't like any client or semi-client disrupting the routine of his brownstone once they've stepped foot inside. "You will stay," Wolfe told her, tone final. "Fritz will provide tea. Mr. Goodwin will conduct inquiries." That settled. I collected my hat and coat. Helen's eyes followed me to the door, heavy with fear and suspicion. I gave her a nod that was meant to say I've got this, though between you and me, I wasn't convinced. The air outside was thick, the kind that makes cab drivers lazy and pedestrians edgy. I caught a taxi and headed uptown toward the McKellar Publishing Building, a marble and bronze box that wanted to look like culture, but smelled like money. Lights glowed in half the windows. Publishing may deal in words, but at heart it's about balance sheets, and balance sheets don't punch out at 5. The lobby guard gave me the squint reserved for private detectives, cops, and strangers in suits. I told him I was here for Bristow, secretary to the Big Cheese. His squint deepened. "Bristow left early today, around 4:30. "Alone?" The guard hesitated. He looked nervous, kept checking his watch. A woman was waiting by the door. Blonde, short, expensive coat. They left together. I tipped him enough to keep his memory limber and took the elevator up to McKellar's office. The receptionist was still there, typing with the mechanical rhythm of someone whose heart wasn't in it. She looked up, blinked, and gave me the standard line. "Mr. McKellar has gone for the day." "I don't need McKellar. Julian Bristow, secretary. You see him leave?" Her hands stilled. "Yes." He looked preoccupied. "Blonde woman?" Pause. "Yes." "And you are?" "Miss Dart, Mr. McKellar's assistant." I pulled out my notebook just to see her squirm. "You know the blonde?" Her lips tightened like I'd just asked for her bank balance. I didn't recognize her, which meant she did. The flush in her cheeks was too sharp to be coincidence. Before I could press, a door opened down the hall. A tall man in a silk scarf stepped out, adjusting gloves that probably cost more than Fritz's grocery bill for a week. Horace McKellar himself, as recognizable as his own press photo. He gave me a look like I'd tracked mud onto his Persian carpet. "Who are you?" "Goodwin," I said. "Nero Wolfe's office. We're looking for Bristow." "Then you're wasting your time," McKellar snapped. "He's unreliable. Always has been. If he's gone, it's because he's hiding something. Good riddance." Miss Dart's eyes flickered, but she kept her lips sealed. I grinned. Funny. His wife thought he was hiding something too. Only she figured it was worth killing him over. That hit home. McKellar froze, then barked a laugh that didn't fool me. "Nonsense. Bristow is a minor cog. He knows nothing that matters." The silk scarf swished as he stalked past, leaving me with the faint smell of expensive cologne and cheaper lies. Back in the cab, I flipped through the notes in my head. Julian Bristow had left early with a mystery blonde, looked nervous, and then vanished before 5. His wife got a note and a phone call, telling her she'd been betrayed. His boss wrote him off like yesterday's newsprint. That made 3 possible suspects in under an hour: the wife, the boss, and the blonde. But here's the kicker. When I reached for my pocket to check the envelope with the note, it wasn't there. Somewhere between Wolfe's office and McKellar's building, it had vanished, which meant someone was already keeping pace with me. And if I didn't find out who, 5 o'clock wasn't the only thing that was going to stop dead. If losing evidence makes you feel like a sap, try losing it when it should have been locked in your inside pocket. I sat in the back of the cab with my hand patting empty cloth and my brain turning over possibilities like a man hunting for change under couch cushions. The envelope had been there when I left Wolfe's office. I'd slipped it in with all the ceremony of tucking a baby to bed. Somewhere between then and now, it had evaporated. That meant one of 2 things. Either I was losing my touch, which I wasn't, or somebody had fingers slick enough to make a magician jealous. The driver caught my face in the rearview mirror. "Lose something, buddy?" "Yeah," I said. "My patience." I gave him the address for the brownstone. Better to face Wolfe's wrath with speed than dawdle around midtown looking like I'd been mugged by ghosts. On the ride down, my mind kept circling the scene at McKellar's office. The secretary with the guilty flush, McKellar with his cologne and contempt, the guard who'd seen the blonde. Any one of them could have a friend nimble enough to slip a hand into my coat on the way out. The city was full of pickpockets, but this hadn't been random. The note was gone because somebody wanted it gone. When I hit the brownstone steps, Fritz opened the door with the kind of look a man wears when he's been asked to keep a nervous woman supplied with tea for over an hour. "She has had 3 cups, he whispered. "No more, Archie. Her hands shake. Tell her she's lucky. Mine will be shaking too." Inside, the office smelled of Wolfe's beer and Helen Bristow's worry. She jumped up as soon as she saw me, her eyes searching for an envelope that wasn't there. Wolfe's head tilted back in the chair, his eyes half closed, but don't let that fool you. He knew. He always knew. "Well?" Wolfe asked. "Well," I said. Julian Bristow left the office early with a blonde in an expensive coat. His boss, McKellar, practically called him a traitor and said good riddance. His assistant, Miss Dart, turned the color of beets when I mentioned the blonde. And our little piece of paper decided it didn't like traveling with me. Helen clutched the arms of her chair. "Gone? You mean lost?" "Lost implies I dropped it in a subway grate." This was lifted. "Someone knew I had it and wanted it bad enough to risk fingers. That's not amateur work." Her lips parted as if to speak, but Wolfe cut in, voice as dry as parchment. "Archie, you are insufferable. Do you imagine you can prance through Midtown with a clue in your pocket without attracting vermin? Pooh, sit. Report in sequence." So I did. I laid out the guard's account of the blonde, Miss Dart's blush, McKellar's dismissal. Wolfe listened with his eyes closed, hands folded across his belly, only moving once to grunt at the mention of the scarf. Helen broke in. "That proves Julian didn't betray me. He's been taken. He must have been forced to leave with her." Wolfe's eyes snapped open. "Madam, spare me melodrama. A man who leaves with a woman rarely requires compulsion." Her face flamed, but she held her ground. "You don't know Julian. He wouldn't." "I know men," Wolfe said, "and I know publishing magnates. Your husband was at the fulcrum of something unsavory. Whether he leapt or was pushed remains to be determined." I tried to ease the tension. "Look, Mrs. Bristow, whatever your husband's extracurriculars, we're not here to judge. We're here to find him. The note was meant to shake you, and it did. The call was meant to rattle me, and it almost did. That means we're circling close to somebody's sore spot." Wolfe's lips twitched, which is about as close as he gets to a smile without food involved. "Archie, you will return to McKellar's office tomorrow. At once, secure the services of Mr. Saul Panzer. He will determine who entered or left the building between 4 and 5. Someone took that note. We shall take something back." That was Wolfe's style. When slapped, he slapped back twice. Helen's voice was small. "What should I do?" "Stay, and be silent." He closed his eyes again. "Fritz, no more tea." That was my signal to get Saul on the phone. I dialed, gave him the details, and he promised to start before dawn. Saul doesn't miss much. If a mouse crossed the McKellar lobby at 5 sharp, he'd find its paw prints. By 10 o'clock, Helen had been ushered to a guest room. Wolfe never lets clients roam the house unsupervised, but he also doesn't eject them when a storm's brewing. I sat with Wolfe in the office, him with his orchids, me with a bourbon, and the silence between us thicker than the walls. Finally, he said, "Archie, the note. Describe the paper, the type." I did. Plain white notepaper, nothing fancy. Standard typewriter font. Wolfe grunted. "Cheap. Anonymous. Intended to wound emotionally. not to impress intellectually. Yet its disappearance gives it value. Curious. That's one word for it. I've got another. What? Bait. That got his eyes open again. He stared at me, then nodded once, slow. Perhaps. If so, Mr. Goodwin, we have already nibbled. I didn't argue, because in my gut I felt it too. Someone out there was leading us along, and 5 o'clock had only been the opening move. The next morning, Saul reported in. He came by, coat damp, from the drizzle, and laid out his findings with the neat precision of a jeweler. Julian Bristow left with a woman. Blonde, yes, but not society. Her coat was mink, but the cut was last year's. Smart enough to pass, cheap enough to suggest debt or desperation. They got into a black sedan, no plates visible. Driver male, mid-40s, heavy build. They headed east. East to what? I asked. Couldn't follow. The cab I was in got clipped by traffic, but the sedan turned near the river. Might have been heading for a pier. Wolfe sat listening, his hands steepled. And the note? Saul shook his head. No trace. Whoever lifted it was a professional. You'd never have known, Archie. I muttered something impolite about professionals. Wolfe ignored me. So, we have a secretary who disappears with a woman, a publishing magnate who sneers at him, an assistant who blushes, and a wife who trembles. Somewhere between them lies betrayal. Archie, tomorrow you will interview Miss Dart. Press her. She knows the woman. Helen, who had crept back into the office to listen, stiffened. And Julian? Wolfe gave her a look that could have frozen lava. Madame, your husband has arranged to embroil us. If he lives, we shall extract him. If he does not, we shall expose him. In either case, patience. Her eyes filled, but she bit down on her lip and stayed silent. That, in Wolfe's book, earned her points. Later, when she was gone, I leaned on Wolfe's desk. You think Bristow ran off with the blonde? I think, Wolfe said, that 5 o'clock was not an accident. The stopped clock, the note, the call, they are symbols. Someone wants to make betrayal tangible. We must learn why. And how do you suggest we do that? He closed his eyes, hands folding again, by waiting until they strike once more. That wasn't my idea of fun. Waiting for betrayal is like standing in front of a firing squad and hoping they run out of bullets. But Wolfe had spoken, and when the mountain says, sit, you sit. What none of us knew. Helen in her guest room, Wolfe among his orchids, me staring at the ceiling, was that the next strike was already in motion. Because across town, in an office with its lights burning past midnight, a second envelope was being sealed. And this one wasn't addressed to Helen Bristow, it was addressed to Nero Wolfe. The morning after Saul's report, I wasn't expecting much action before breakfast, but trouble has a habit of showing up earlier than the mail. Fritz had just set a plate of eggs in front of me when the doorbell clanged. I answered it with toast still in my mouth and found a boy from a courier service standing there with a stiff brown envelope. No signature, no return address, but the name written across it in block capitals stopped me cold. Nero Wolfe. If I'd been alone, I might have done the sensible thing and opened it right there. But years of working with Wolfe had trained me better. I thanked the boy, tipped him, and brought the envelope inside like it was radioactive. Wolfe was in the office, mid-ritual with his orchids, but I didn't need to announce myself. He turned at the sound of the door, and his gaze locked on the package in my hand. Another, he said flatly. Looks like you're on the mailing list, I replied. He returned to his chair and extended a hand. I passed it over, resisting the urge to crack it open first. He slit it with the ivory paper knife that lives on his desk and drew out a single sheet. It was the same cheap notepaper, same typewriter font, but this time the message was longer. The betrayal widens. 5 o'clock is not the end. Watch your own house. The last line carried enough chill to make Fritz's eggs turn cold in my stomach. Helen Bristow, who had been pretending to read a magazine on the couch, shot to her feet. "What does it mean?" "It means," I said, "that whoever wrote this is either clairvoyant or has an unhealthy interest in Wolfe's decor." Wolfe laid the paper flat on his blotter, his lips compressing until they nearly vanished. "Archie, doors and windows, secure them. Fritz will not answer the bell without your approval." That was Wolfe's version of going to battle stations. The brownstone wasn't Fort Knox, but it was close once Wolfe gave orders. I checked locks, bolted side doors, and made sure the garden gate was fastened tight. When I came back, Helen was wringing her hands, Wolfe was sipping beer, and the office smelled like nerves and malt. "Someone knows where I am," Helen said. "They'll come after me." "Pfui," Wolfe replied. "The note was addressed to me. If our adversary wanted you silenced, madam, you would already be mute. This is a taunt, an attempt to rattle my composure." "Does it work?" I asked. His glare could have cracked walnuts. "Archie, your flippancy is insufferable. Have you arranged the interview with Miss Dart?" "Set for 11. She's expecting me." "Good. You will press her until she yields the identity of the blonde. She knows it. She will resist. Use your talents." "Which ones?" "The less you employ brute force, the more likely she will be candid. But if charm fails, remind her that betrayal spares no one. That should rattle her." I pocketed my notebook and hat. Helen looked as though she wanted to beg me not to leave, but Wolfe gave her a single glance that pinned her in place. He could have commanded armies if he'd ever left the chair. McKellar Publishing looked less polished in the morning light, like a nightclub with the bulbs still on. Miss Dart was waiting in her glass box office, and she didn't bother with pleasantries. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hair hastily pinned. "Mr. Goodwin," she said tightly, "I told you yesterday, I don't know the woman who left with Bristow." "And I told you," I said, sliding into a chair, "that you did. You might as well give her name before the guessing game gets ugly." She pressed her lips together until I thought they'd disappear. I leaned back and gave her my patient detective look, the one that says, "I've got all day and you don't." After 30 seconds, she cracked. "All right, her name is Lydia Vance. She is an editor here. She left 2 months ago. There was unpleasantness." "What kind?" "She and Mr. McKellar disagreed on a manuscript. She accused him of stealing ideas, of burying her work. It got heated. She resigned. I didn't think I'd see her again." "But you saw her yesterday." "Yes." Her eyes dropped. "With Julian Bristow. I don't know why." That was a lie, and not even a good one. She knew plenty. I leaned forward. "Miss Dart, this is bigger than office politics. Bristow's missing. His wife is half out of her mind. You've got 2 options. Give me what you know, or watch Nero Wolfe rip it out of McKellar himself. Which do you prefer?" Her hands clenched on the blotter. Lydia was close to Julian. Not romantically, I don't think. But she trusted him. She said he was the only one who could expose McKellar. Something about financial records, a hidden ledger. Now we were getting somewhere. "And where's this ledger?" Her gaze darted left. "I don't know. She said she had proof. That's all." I left her with a card and a warning. If she remembered more, she'd better call before Wolfe remembered her. Back at the brownstone, I laid it all out. Wolfe listened, motionless, while Helen sat stiff as a statue. When I mentioned Lydia Vance, her lips tightened. "I knew it," she whispered. "Julian spoke her name once. Months ago. He said she was principled. He admired her." Wolfe opened his eyes. "Admiration is perilous. So, Archie, we have McKellar the magnate, Dart the blushing assistant, Lydia Vance the resentful editor, and Bristow at the center. Add to that 2 notes and a vanished document. A circle is forming." "And you're in the middle of it," I reminded him, holding up the second note. He ignored me. "Saul will pursue the sedan near the river. You will locate Lydia Vance. begin with her residence. If she is absent, apply your ingenuity. Bring her to me if possible." "Sure," I said. "And if she doesn't feel like a stroll?" "Persuade her." His eyes closed again. "This betrayal, whatever its nature, has made itself personal." That was Wolfe's version of a declaration of war. By evening, I had Lydia's address from a directory, and her absence confirmed by a landlady who smelled of onions and suspicion. The room was neat, too neat, like someone had tidied it for an inspection. On the desk, though, was a half-burned match beside an ashtray and the faint scent of perfume. Someone had been there not long before. I was bending over to check the drawer when the door creaked. I straightened, notebook in hand, as a shadow moved across the threshold. "Looking for something, Mr. Goodwin?" The voice was female, cool and too calm for comfort. Lydia Vance had just come home, and she didn't sound surprised to find me in her room. I pivoted, keeping my hand near my pocket where the notebook lived. Lydia Vance was framed in the doorway, coat still on, rainwater dripping from the hem. She had the kind of face that wasn't pretty in the usual way, but was hard to look away from, angles, sharp eyes, and a mouth that looked like it had spent years chewing on grievances. She didn't blink when she saw me, which told me two things. First, she knew exactly who I was, and second, she wasn't surprised to find Nero Wolfe's legman standing in her room uninvited. "Depends what you've got lying around," I said, casual. "Ledger, incriminating notes, missing husbands. I'm not picky." Her coat slipped from her shoulders onto a chair. She crossed to the desk, lit a cigarette, and leaned against it like she owned the ground. "Julian Bristow's wife sent you." "Close." "Wolfe sent me. His wife's parked in our office, fretting holes in Fritz's upholstery. I'm the one who gets the fresh air." She gave a small, humorless laugh. "Yes. Julian always said you were Wolfe's errand boy with better shoes." "That's so? And what did he say about you?" Her eyes flashed. "That I was one of the few people left in that cesspool of a publishing house who valued truth over profit, which is why McKellar pushed me out." "Truth, huh? So what truth had Bristow stumbled over at 5 o'clock sharp?" She dragged on her cigarette, exhaled smoke in a neat stream, and studied me. "If you're in my room without a warrant, you already know enough to be dangerous. I'll tell you one thing. Julian was right to be afraid." That was helpful as a fortune cookie. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Listen, Lydia. He's missing. His wife thinks he's been taken, Wolfe thinks he's been played, and McKellar thinks he's expendable. If you know where he is, now's the time to cough it up." For a flicker, something cracked in her cool mask. She looked down at the match on the desk, then back at me. "I don't know where he is, but I know what he was carrying." That perked my ears. "The ledger." She nodded once. "Not just financial records. Proof that McKellar siphoned funds, manipulated authors' estates, buried royalties. If it came out, he'd lose everything. Julian promised to bring it to me. He never arrived." I didn't need Wolfe's brain to see the shape of the thing. Bristow running scared with dynamite in his briefcase, Lydia waiting for the handoff, McKellar standing to lose an empire. Somewhere in between, a blonde and a sedan had hijacked the plan. "Where was the drop supposed to happen?" I asked. Her hesitation told me I was brushing against live wires. "By the river," she said finally. "Pier 17. He was to meet me there with the ledger, at 5. When he didn't come, I thought he'd lost his nerve. Now I know better. And better is that someone intercepted him, and if they have the ledger, Julian won't live long." The way she said it wasn't melodramatic. It was cold fact. I studied her. "Then why didn't you run screaming to the cops?" "Because the ledger isn't just financial. It implicates men who'd bury me faster than Julian. McKellar is only one name. There are others. Judges, investors, authors, heirs. I didn't know how far the rot went until Julian showed me samples. I whistled low. "Lady, you've got yourself a hornet's nest, and now Wolfe's name is on the latest envelope. That means somebody's widening the circle." Her brows drew together. "Envelope?" I told her briefly about the note that arrived for Wolfe. Her cigarette wavered, ash spilling onto the floor. She stubbed it out sharp. "Then they're warning him. They don't want him meddling, which means they know Julian trusted him, or trusted you." I didn't like the sound of that. If Wolfe was being drawn into the crosshairs, it was because someone figured he'd sniff out the truth faster than the cops, and they were probably right. "Here's the deal," I said. "You come with me to Wolfe's. Tell him everything you told me, and maybe he cooks up a plan before the ledger and your friend Bristow both end up at the bottom of the East River." Her lips tightened, but she nodded. "All right. But if Wolfe betrays me, he won't," I said. "Trust me, betrayal isn't his hobby. Orchids, yes. Betrayal, no." On the ride back, Lydia sat stiff beside me, eyes darting to every corner like she expected a sedan to pull alongside. I didn't blame her. Twice, I caught the same black car shadowing us in traffic, then peeling off. Either my nerves were playing tricks, or we had company. At the brownstone, Fritz's eyebrows nearly lifted off his head when I walked in with another guest. Wolfe was in his chair, eyes closed, lips pursed, as though meditating on beer. They snapped open when he saw Lydia. "So," he said, "the editor." She met his gaze squarely, which impressed me more than I expected. Most people shrink under Wolfe's scrutiny. She didn't. She repeated what she'd told me, with fewer pauses and no waver in her voice. When she was done, the office felt thick enough to cut. Wolfe exhaled through his nose. A ledger implicating McKellar and others of rank. A secretary who vanishes. A note to his wife. A note to me. Phooey. Whoever orchestrates this is not merely shielding McKellar's peccadillos. They are staging a performance. Helen Bristow, who had been silent until then, suddenly leaned forward. "Performance? What do you mean?" "Symbols," Wolfe said. The stopped clock at 5, the repeated references to betrayal, the timed delivery of notes. Someone wishes to dramatize events. To humiliate, not only to conceal. It is vanity at work as much as calculation. Lydia's hands tightened on her lap. "Then Julian—" "Alive," Wolfe said shortly. "For now. Dead men do not serve as props in dramas." That comforted no one, least of all Helen, but Wolfe had already turned to me. "Archie, Saul will pursue the pier. You will keep Lydia under watch. If the enemy knows her role, she's a target. And I, meanwhile, will think." Thinking for Wolfe meant shutting his eyes, folding his hands, and sinking into the chair like he planned to take root. For the rest of us, it meant pacing, watching windows, and waiting for the next move. It didn't take long. By midnight, the phone rang. I picked up, half expecting the same whisper as before. Instead, it was Saul, his voice steady but grim. "Archie," he said, "I found the car, black sedan, abandoned near Pier 17, and I found something else." "What?" "A man's shoe. Expensive. Inside it, the initials JB. I repeated it aloud. Helen stifled a sob. Lydia shut her eyes. Wolfe's lids didn't even twitch. "Bring it here," he said, voice like iron. And just like that, the noose around Julian Bristow tightened, and 5 o'clock's betrayal ticked on toward midnight. Saul Panzer's arrival with the shoe was about as quiet as a cat slipping through velvet curtains. He handed it over like it was contaminated, and Wolfe regarded it as though he expected it to sprout legs and explain itself. The initials JB were etched inside, gold on leather, sharp enough to sting. Helen Bristow's breath snagged the instant she saw it, but Wolfe held up a hand before she could erupt. "Archie," he said, "catalogue." I took the shoe, made a note of the make, leather, size, initials, and the scuff along the side that looked recent. It was damp, River damp, not rain damp. That distinction, I've learned, matters. Left behind on purpose? I asked. Saul's dark eyes flicked to Wolfe. That's my guess. There wasn't a struggle, no blood, no drag marks. Just the shoe, placed neat, like somebody wanted it found. Symbolic again, Wolfe muttered, disgust rolling off the word. Betrayal staged for effect. Helen's voice cracked. But what does it mean? He wouldn't leave his shoe. He wouldn't... Madam. Wolfe's voice was granite. If your husband still breathes, his captors wish him to play a role. The shoe is a token. They mean us to believe he is lost, perhaps dead, while they plot the next act. Lydia Vance, perched stiffly in her chair, leaned forward. That's theatre. Exactly what they're doing. Whoever's behind this, McKellar or someone above him, wants the drama to be remembered. Every move is staged. I asked Saul, anyone hanging around the pier when you found it? A man smoking by a warehouse door. Didn't look like dock muscle. Too tidy. When I circled back, he was gone. Might have been nothing, but... With this case, I said, nothing is usually everything. Wolfe waved a hand, fat fingers curling like punctuation. Enough. The ledger, that is the key. Without it, we chase shadows. Archie, Lydia claims Bristow carried it. If true, then whoever has Bristow has the ledger. They will use it when it suits them. Helen's eyes went glassy, but she stayed quiet for once. Wolfe turned to Lydia. You say McKellar siphoned funds, manipulated estates. Was Bristow fool enough to confront him? She shook her head. Not directly. He planned to bring it to me, then to Wolfe, then, if necessary, the police. Julian wanted protection before he took that risk. He trusted Wolfe's name to keep him alive. Pray, my name is no talisman. Wolfe closed his eyes. But the presumption is flattering. It was late, but Wolfe sent Saul back out to sniff around the publishing house for any tie between McKellar and riverfront property. I was tasked with guarding the brownstone, no small job, given the new threat in the second note. Wolfe forbade Lydia or Helen to leave the house. He told Fritz to prepare enough food to withstand a siege, which tells you the kind of mood he was in. At dawn, I took a call in the office. Saul again, voice clipped. McKellar owns shares in a shell company with warehouses by the East River. Same block as Pier 17. Paper trail is buried deep, but I dug it up. That didn't smell like coincidence. I scribbled it down and relayed it to Wolfe, who received the news with a grunt that meant he'd already guessed it. Helen, wringing her hands near the window, whispered, Then McKellar has him. Wolfe didn't open his eyes. Possibly, but do not leap. McKellar is not imaginative enough to stage betrayal as theatre. Someone behind him is orchestrating. He may be complicit or merely tolerated it until the stage grew too large. I asked the obvious. So who's writing the script? Someone who relishes symbolism, the notes, the stopped clock, the shoe. These are not acts of concealment. They are acts of revelation, presented slowly, like chapters. Wolfe exhaled through his nose. It is vanity, which narrows the field. Lydia's voice cut in, sharp. McKellar is vain. Yes, but vain about wealth, not drama. He is too coarse for this. The debate was interrupted by the phone again. I picked up, expecting Saul. Instead, a new voice, smooth, precise, every syllable manicured. Mr. Goodwin? That's me. Be sure your employer receives this. At precisely 5 o'clock today, a new betrayal will occur. If Wolfe interferes, the final curtain falls. The line went dead. I replaced the receiver slowly, spine prickling. Wolfe's lids lifted. Report. I did. Every word. He listened, then reached for his beer as if the call were nothing more than a telegram from a florist. 5 again, he said. They are obsessed with the hour. Helen looked close to fainting. They'll kill him. perhaps. Or perhaps they intend another display. Wolfe looked at me. Archie, you will go to McKellar. Confront him. If he lies, note it. If he panics, exploit it. The hour approaches. We must not sit idle. Lydia stood. Take me. No, Wolfe snapped. You will stay here under guard. I will not have you paraded into their theatre. Her glare could have scorched, but she sat down again. I headed out into a wet grey afternoon and made for McKellar's building. The lobby guard gave me another squint, but waved me through. Upstairs, McKellar's office was humming, assistants darting like bees. He sat behind his desk, silk scarf in place, reading correspondence with disdain. Goodwin, he said, barely glancing up. Still chasing my secretary's phantoms? Funny thing, I told him. Those phantoms leave footprints, like your warehouses down by the pier. That got his attention. His hand froze on the paper. I have no idea what you mean. Sure you do. Shell companies, Pier 17, black sedan. The works. Only problem is, your little stage play's gotten fancy. Notes to wives, shoes by the river. Who's your playwright? His face darkened, but he didn't break. You presume too much. Bristow was a thief. If he is gone, good riddance. That wasn't a denial. It was a performance. I left before his assistant could call security. On the way down, my mind ticked through Wolfe's words. Vanity, theatre, betrayal at 5. Someone wanted us watching the clock, waiting for the next act. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in his chair, eyes shut, lips pressed thin. I relayed every detail, including McKellar's brush-off. He listened, then said, He lies poorly, but he is still not the author. Archie, recall, the notes were typed, the paper common, but the language, the betrayal widens. The final curtain, that is not McKellar's voice. That is the voice of someone who believes themselves clever, a dramatist of betrayal. It was almost 5 when the doorbell rang. Fritz, pale, brought in another envelope. Wolfe opened it with a steady hand. Inside was a single line. At 5 o'clock, the betrayer is revealed. We all looked at one another. The clock in the hall ticked loud as a drum. And then, as the hands reached 5, the phone rang. The ring of that phone at the exact stroke of 5 could have been scripted by Shakespeare's darker cousin. I crossed the room in 3 strides, picked up the receiver, and put it to my ear. The voice on the other end was the same smooth tenor I'd heard earlier, polished, deliberate, and too pleased with itself. Mr. Goodwin, it said, you are punctual. As promised, the betrayer is revealed. Look to your house. Then came a sound I didn't expect. A woman's muffled cry, sharp and desperate, before the line went dead. I kept the receiver in my hand, staring at it like it might explain itself. Wolfe's eyes opened slowly. Report. I did. Helen Bristow went white as porcelain. Lydia Vance stiffened, her jaw tightening until it looked carved. Wolfe didn't speak for a moment. He leaned back, lids lowering, his lips working silently. Then he said, Archie, search the house. Now. That was enough to send me on a sprint. I tore through the rooms, kitchen, hall, guest quarters. Helen was still in the office, trembling. Lydia, too. Fritz was in the kitchen, rattled but intact. Everyone accounted for. Which meant the house they'd spoken of wasn't Wolfe's brownstone. I reported back. Wolfe's nostrils flared. Then it is metaphor, a house not ours. Perhaps the Bristow household. Perhaps McKellar's empire. They delight in ambiguity. Helen gripped the arms of her chair. That cry, you don't think it may have been your husband, Wolfe said, unsparing, or it may have been staged. Their play-acting continues. I didn't like it. A man who enjoys theater that much doesn't care how many bodies he leaves backstage. The silence was broken by the doorbell. I moved fast, gun hand ready. Saul Panzer stood there, eyes sharp. Got something? he said, stepping inside. Warehouse near the pier. Men moving crates, but not the usual dock crew. I saw McKellar's chauffeur. Wolfe grunted. So, the string ties. Saul pulled a folded slip from his pocket. And this, dropped near the door. A torn piece of ledger paper. Figures, initials, dates. Enough to be dangerous. I handed it to Wolfe, who examined it with the care of a jeweler. His lips pressed tighter. So they bait us further. Archie, you and Saul will return there tonight. Observe, do not act. If Bristow is alive, they will move him again. Find where. Helen rose, voice breaking. I can't just sit here while Julian— You can and you will, Wolfe said, thunder behind the calm. Madam, hysteria is the luxury of those uninvolved. You are involved, therefore silence. She sank back, crushed, and Wolfe closed his eyes again, sinking into thought. Saul and I left after dark. The rain had thinned to mist, laying a sheen on the streets. We parked near the warehouse, keeping low. Through cracks in the wood, I saw men shifting crates, heavy and marked with nothing but numbers. One figure stood apart, tall, wrapped in a long coat. Even from a distance, his stance radiated command. That's not McKellar, Saul whispered. No, I agreed, but it's somebody who thinks he's directing the play. We waited, motionless, until a sedan pulled up. Two men got out, and between them, half shoved, half guided, was Julian Bristow, pale, disheveled, and very much alive. I felt my gut tighten. Saul put a hand on my arm. We can't move yet. I know, I muttered, teeth grinding. They hustled him inside. 10 minutes later, the tall man followed, locking the door. The warehouse swallowed them whole. When we got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was waiting with his beer. We reported every detail. Helen nearly collapsed when she heard Julian was alive. Lydia's eyes glittered. Wolfe remained motionless, lids closed, lips tight. Alive, he said, as I surmised. A prop cannot perform if destroyed. Lydia leaned forward. Then we must go to the police. No, Wolfe thundered. They will blunder. They will seize crates and men, and the author of this charade will vanish. No, we must lure him here, into my house. Only then can I strip his vanity bare. Lure him how? I asked. Wolfe opened his eyes. With what he craves. Betrayal. He must believe he has achieved it. We shall give him the illusion, and when he comes to witness it, we shall end his play. Helen whispered, What illusion? Wolfe did not answer. He folded his hands, closed his eyes, and retreated into the fortress of his brain. For the rest of us, it was waiting. Lydia paced like a caged panther. Helen prayed under her breath. Saul left to gather information, promising to return by dawn. I sat with my notebook, wondering how many more acts this playwright had planned before the final curtain. Then, just as the clock struck midnight, the phone rang again. I grabbed it. The same voice purred into my ear. Tomorrow at 5, the final betrayal. Be ready to watch your world collapse. The line went dead, leaving the silence heavy enough to choke. Wolfe opened his eyes, calm as stone. Archie, he said, the end approaches. Tomorrow, we trap our dramatist. And though he said it with all the certainty of a man describing the weather, I felt the chill settle in my bones. The air in the brownstone the next morning was thick enough to slice. Fritz kept bringing in coffee as if caffeine could plug the holes in our nerves. Wolfe, of course, was unbothered, at least outwardly. He sat in his chair, lips pursed, eyes shut, as though he were napping through a thunderstorm. I'd seen that posture before. It meant the gears inside were grinding fast, however slow the body looked. At 9 sharp, he opened his eyes and announced, Archie, we will host them. I had my pencil half tilted above the notebook. Host who? Unless you mean a breakfast club for kidnappers, We might be short on hors d'oeuvres. Pfui. The author of this performance will not resist. They must see the climax. At 5 o'clock today, the final betrayal, they said. Then we shall give them one, our own. Helen Bristow lifted her head, her face pale but intent. What does that mean? My husband, Julian. Madam, Wolfe cut her off. Your husband is alive. That much is clear. He's a pawn, nothing more. Pawns are preserved until sacrificed. Our task is to seize the hand that moves him. That hand will come here, expecting to witness betrayal. Instead, it will meet exposure. Lydia Vance leaned forward, sharp-eyed. And what role do you want me to play in this theater? Wolfe gave her a glance heavy enough to squash a lesser soul. You will wait. The betrayer intends to use you as symbol or scapegoat. We will turn the symbol. I scribbled all this down, half for the record, half because I didn't want to lose track of Wolfe's vocabulary when it came time to bait the trap. He kept using words like performance, author, theater. It was shaping up to be less of a manhunt and more of a matinee. By mid-morning, Saul checked in with new tidings. He had traced McKellar's chauffeur to a row house in Queens used as a temporary hideout. No Bristow, but signs he'd been kept there. Ropes, cigarette stubs, a teacup with the initials JB scratched faintly into the porcelain. Saul tailed the chauffeur back toward Midtown, but didn't close in. Wolfe only nodded at the report, as if it confirmed his own map. At noon, the brownstone felt like the green room before curtain. Wolfe had me rearrange the office. Chairs pulled into a semicircle, extra seating brought in. Nothing casual about it. If you know Wolfe, you know he doesn't move furniture unless he plans a full-dress performance. He dictated a list. Summon McKellar. Summon Miss Dart. Summon the chauffeur by hook or subpoena. Summon anyone with a tie to the ledger. Bring them by 4. I raised an eyebrow. You want me to wrangle all of them in 3 hours? You have managed more impossible tasks with less notice. Do not fail. So I hit the phones and then the pavement, wearing out shoe leather and charm in equal measure. McKellar arrived by threat of police entanglement. Miss Dart came by guilt and a warning that Wolfe already knew too much. The chauffeur was harder, but Saul cornered him and delivered him like a parcel, sweating bullets. By 4:30, Wolfe's office looked like a jury box full of suspects. Helen and Lydia sat to one side, both taut as bowstrings. Wolfe didn't speak immediately. He sat with his eyes closed, letting the room simmer. At 4:50, he opened them and fixed each face in turn. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, voice heavy as granite. At 5 o'clock, betrayal has been promised. We are minutes away. Someone here intends to reveal themselves in theatrical fashion, but I will not allow this house to be used as a stage for your vanity. Instead, I will speak. McKellar blustered first. This is absurd. I don't belong here. Silence, Wolfe thundered, and McKellar's words died in his throat. The clock ticked louder with each breath. 4:55. Lydia's eyes darted to the windows. Helen wrung her hands. The chauffeur sweated rivers. Saul leaned against the wall, watchful. Then, as the hands reached the top, the phone rang. The exact same chime, the exact same hour. I answered, holding the receiver high enough for the room to hear. The smooth voice purred. Now, the betrayal is complete. In Wolfe's house, the truth is unmasked. The line cut, leaving the silence vibrating. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Yes, the truth is unmasked. He raised a finger and his gaze pinned McKellar. You, sir, have bled estates and authors. You siphoned money, but you are not the dramatist. You are too coarse. You lacked imagination. McKellar flushed red but didn't deny it. Wolfe shifted to the chauffeur. You ferried Bristow. You obey orders, but you do not compose notes. The man dropped his eyes. Then Wolfe turned to Miss Dart. His voice softened, which was worse than thunder. Miss Dart, You who blushed at the mention of Lydia. You who watched Bristow with too much care. You who knew the woman and lied. You are the betrayer's shadow, but not the mind. She gasped, her face crumpling. I only wanted... Wanted what? Wolfe snapped. To protect him, to join him. Phooey! Finally, Wolfe's gaze settled on Lydia Vance. The room froze. Lydia Vance, Wolfe said, low but cutting. You cloak yourself in indignation, but you are the playwright. You left McKellar's employ in rage, and you wrote your revenge as drama. You lured Bristow with promises of truth, then staged his betrayal as theatre. You typed the notes, you chose the hour, you crafted the shoe as symbol. Vanity is your signature. Her eyes flared, but she didn't speak. Silence was admission enough. Helen Bristow gave a strangled sound. No, Julian trusted her. Exactly, Wolfe said. And that trust was her stage. She needed his faith to bait the trap. She needed his wife's terror to heighten the drama. And she needed me, my name, my reputation, to crown her play. She wished to expose betrayal itself, to humiliate, to demonstrate her cleverness. I watched Lydia's hands tremble, but her voice came, steady, almost proud. Yes, he betrayed me first. McKellar destroyed my work. Bristow swore he would help me, but when he hesitated, when he faltered, I wrote his role for him, and you, Wolfe, you were to be the final witness. The room crackled with shock. Wolfe leaned back, lips curling with contempt. Vanity, he repeated. It always unmasks itself. The clock chimed the final stroke of 5, sealing the moment. Lydia didn't flinch under Wolfe's accusation, which was the surest sign he'd nailed her. Most guilty parties either crumple or rage. She stood there like an actress savoring her curtain call. Her voice was low, steady, and stripped of apology. You're right, Wolfe. I wanted an audience. I wanted the world to see McKellar ruined, Bristow exposed, and me vindicated. I didn't write lies. Every note was truth, truth framed so no one could ignore it. Helen Bristow's gasp cracked the air. Exposed? What do you mean? Lydia's eyes flicked to her, cool and sharp. Your husband wasn't a saint, Mrs. Bristow. He had the ledger, yes, but he didn't bring it to me out of duty. He dangled it. He wanted to know how much I'd pay, how much I'd grovel. He was going to betray you, betray me, betray everyone until I turned the stage against him. Helen's face collapsed, and I took a step toward her in case she toppled. Wolfe lifted a finger. Archie. His tone stopped me cold. He wasn't finished. Miss Vance, Wolfe said, your vanity intoxicates you, but you have erred. You think betrayal is revelation, but in truth it is concealment. You concealed your authorship behind McKellar's coarseness, behind Bristow's weakness, behind melodramatic tokens. But the mind behind the notes could not resist speaking through them. Their language betrayed you. Lydia's lips curved. And yet you still came, Wolfe. You still let yourself be drawn into my play. He shifted in his chair, settling deeper. Phooey. I did not come for you. I came because a man was missing and his wife implored me. You are incidental. That got her. For the first time, her mask slipped, pride stung by dismissal. She stood rigid, fists clenched. Incidental? Yes, and expendable. Wolfe turned his head slightly. Archie. That one word was enough. I moved fast, stepping behind her before she realized. She spun, but Saul was quicker. He blocked her path. The chauffeur shrank into his chair, unwilling to move. McKellar looked ready to faint. Helen buried her face in her hands. Wolfe's voice was calm again, measured. Miss Vance, where is Julian Bristow? Her jaw locked. If you're as clever as you think, find him. Archie, Wolfe said, apply the lever. I pulled the torn ledger page from my pocket, the one Saul had recovered. I dangled it. Funny thing, paper trails don't like to stay hidden. This little scrap, enough to send McKellar into a cell. If I hand it over with your name attached, the law will swallow you whole. But if you trade me Bristow's location, Wolfe might, just might, keep your authorship private." Her eyes darted to the page and then to McKellar, who had gone ashen. "You'd lie," she spat. I shrugged. "Sure. But Wolfe doesn't. If he says he'll bury your name, he will. You know that." Wolfe's eyes opened a fraction. "Decide." The clock ticked, loud and merciless. Finally, Lydia exhaled. "Fine. He's in the warehouse still, locked in a crate near the back. They were going to move him tonight, dump him in the river with the ledger. McKellar's chauffeur knows which crate." The chauffeur jolted, stammering, I just drove." "Enough," Wolfe snapped. "Archie, Saul, go." Helen lurched to her feet. "I'm coming too." "No," Wolfe and I said in unison. She collapsed back into the chair, weeping. Lydia's smile returned faintly, bitter. "Even when you win, Wolfe, you lose. Bristow's faith in you is still betrayal. Of her." I didn't answer. I just grabbed my coat and headed out with Saul. The warehouse loomed dark and empty when we reached it. The crates were stacked like tombs. Saul's flashlight cut through shadows until we found the one with fresh nails and a faint scuff of shoe leather along the side. We pried it open fast, wood splintering, and there he was, Julian Bristow, bound, gagged, pale but breathing. His eyes were wide with terror and relief. We hauled him out, cut the ropes, and hustled him into Saul's car. He croaked gratitude through cracked lips, but I wasn't in the mood for speeches. I wanted him back at the brownstone, where Wolfe could settle accounts. When we brought him in, Helen rushed forward, sobbing, clutching him like she'd never let go. Wolfe didn't move an inch. He just watched. Lydia sat still, face stone, but her eyes burned. McKellar sweated rivers. Wolfe finally spoke. "Mr. Bristow, your wife feared for you. Your mistress of manuscripts betrayed you. Your employer used you. You have been a pawn, and a willing one. Now you will tell me where the ledger is." Julian trembled. I hid it, in a safety deposit box. Only I can access it." "Pfui," Wolfe said. "You will access it tomorrow. For now, you will rest. Archie, take him upstairs. Then return. We are not finished." I did as told, leaving Bristow with Fritz. When I came back, the office was taut as a noose. Wolfe leaned forward now, eyes open, the mountain shifting. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice carrying weight that pinned them all. "The play is over. At 5 o'clock, betrayal was revealed. But now, justice will be written." The room held its breath. I knew what was coming, Wolfe tightening the net until no one could wriggle free. And the next words out of his mouth were going to change the game entirely. Wolfe didn't waste the moment. The office was crowded, the air thick with fear and sweat, but he had every one of them fixed like moths under glass. His eyes opened wide, sharp now, the pretense of indolence stripped away. The heavy folds of his voice rolled out with the same finality as a gavel. "Enough. You have all played your parts in this tawdry charade, but the author has been unmasked, the pawn retrieved, and the stage dismantled. What remains is to set each of you in your rightful place." Helen Bristow sat rigid, still clutching the memory of her husband's trembling face. Lydia Vance leaned forward like a lioness waiting to strike, her hands balled into fists on her knees. McKellar was pale as paper, scarf askew, the sweat glistening on his temples. Miss Dart's eyes darted, pun intended, between them all, guilty tremors twitching across her mouth. The chauffeur hunched low, trying to vanish into the upholstery. I stayed back, leaning against the wall with my notebook open, pencil ready. Wolfe's office had turned into a courtroom, and I knew the verdicts were about to start dropping. "Mr. McKellar," Wolfe began, eyes narrowing on the publisher. "You have for years siphoned funds, concealed royalties, and profited from theft. You are coarse, vain about wealth, but utterly incapable of scripting betrayal as drama. You are a thief, not a playwright. You will face the law for embezzlement once Bristow's ledger emerges, but you are not our author." McKellar sputtered, his hands shaking. You can't prove—" Wolfe cut him dead with a thunderous "Silence!" Turning his bulk slightly, Wolfe fixed on Miss Dart. "You are loyal to no one but your own fears. You blushed at the mention of Lydia because you knew, and you lied to conceal her. You betrayed Bristow not with malice, but with cowardice. You are accessory, not creator." She buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking. I'd seen enough confessions to know she wouldn't hold up under a police lamp for more than 5 minutes. Wolfe's gaze shifted to the chauffeur. "You are a tool, a driver who carried men and crates. You betrayed your conscience by obeying, but you wrote nothing. You are a servant, and like all poor servants, you will be discarded by those you obeyed." The chauffeur muttered something low, but it didn't matter. Wolfe had already swept past him. Now his eyes landed on Lydia Vance, and the room tightened like a noose. "You, madam, are the author. You framed every act as performance. The stopped clock, the notes, the shoe at the pier, all were your flourishes. You are clever, but cleverness is not wisdom. You thought betrayal a weapon to wield, yet it has betrayed you. You wished to expose McKellar, to punish Bristow, to draw me into your stage. Instead, you revealed your vanity. You betrayed yourself." Her lips curled, part defiance, part triumph. "And still, you admit I was clever enough to make you play." Wolfe's face darkened. "Pfui, I do not play, I deduce. Your play is over." Helen Bristow shot up, eyes blazing through her tears. "What about Julian? He's alive. But you said he was a pawn. What did he do?" Wolfe's voice softened, but it carried no comfort. "Madam, your husband sought to profit from betrayal. He promised the ledger to Lydia, to me, perhaps even to McKellar. He hedged, he dangled, he prepared to sell trust as commodity. His betrayal was not staged, it was lived. He is no author, but he was willing to be every man's traitor. That is why he required rescue, not reward." Helen's face crumpled, her sob escaping raw and pained. I stepped closer, ready to steady her, but Wolfe raised a hand. "Leave her." Then, with the force of final judgment, he concluded, "So we are clear. McKellar is a thief, Dart is a coward, the chauffeur is a tool, Bristow is a pawn, and Lydia Vance is the betrayer, the author of this melodrama. Each of you shall answer accordingly, and when the law has finished, the curtain will fall not on betrayal, but on justice." The silence after his words was heavy as lead. No one moved. It was the kind of silence that only Wolfe could conjure, absolute, crushing, undeniable. Finally, I spoke. "And how do you plan to deliver all this to the cops without them bungling it?" Wolfe closed his eyes, folding his hands across the globe of his stomach. "You will call Inspector Kramer. You will present Bristow's testimony, the ledger when it is retrieved, and the torn page already in our possession. You will deliver Lydia Vance to him as architect, McKellar as financier, and the others as accomplices. If Kramer protests, remind him that the case is already solved, and only an incompetent would allow such a gift to slip." It wasn't exactly an errand I relished. Kramer loves Wolfe's neat packages about as much as Wolfe loves exercise, but Wolfe's word was gospel in this office. Helen sat frozen, her world turned inside out. Bristow was alive, but not the man she thought. Lydia smoldered with rage, but didn't deny the truth. McKellar sagged, beaten. The chauffeur slumped. Dart wept softly. The scene looked less like a courtroom now and more like the aftermath of a battlefield, the smoke still clearing. I closed my notebook and looked at Wolfe. "Satisfied?" His lids drooped again. "Archie, satisfaction is for gluttons. I am replete, not satisfied. Fritz will serve dinner. See to our guests." I couldn't help but grin. "Sure, Nothing like a nice plate of sauerbraten to celebrate betrayal and justice. No one else in the room laughed, but Wolfe didn't need laughter. He had his verdict. And once Wolfe had spoken, there was no curtain call left. It was my privilege, or maybe punishment, to be the one to phone Inspector Kramer. His growl on the other end came as predictably as thunder after lightning. "Goodwin, if this is another one of Wolfe's parlor tricks, I swear I'll—" "It's not a trick," I cut in. "It's a gift. We've got your missing man, a ledger that'll keep auditors busy for months, and a mastermind with a flair for dramatics who'll look real nice in a courtroom, all tied with Wolfe's ribbon." There was a long pause. "Where?" "The brownstone." "Bring a wagon. Better bring two." When I hung up, Wolfe was already reaching for his beer. Helen Bristow sat pale and quiet, her hands folded like she was afraid to move. Lydia Vance had gone still as a statue, her defiance cooled into something like resignation. McKellar looked ready to faint, while Miss Dart kept her face hidden behind her hands. The chauffeur tried to light a cigarette and failed twice. The knock at the door 20 minutes later shook Fritz worse than any thunderstorm. He opened it to reveal Kramer, barrel-bodied and steaming like a kettle. Behind him came Sergeant Pearlie Stebbins and a squad of uniforms ready to haul half the furniture if ordered. Kramer stormed in, eyes scanning the room, then fixed on Wolfe. "Well, what's the circus this time?" Wolfe inclined his head. "Inspector, you arrive at the final act. Mr. Goodwin will brief you." That was my cue. I walked Kramer through it. Bristow's disappearance, the notes, the 5 o'clock symbolism, the shoe at the pier, the ledger trail, and Lydia's carefully scripted betrayals. He listened, skeptical as always, but when I held up the torn ledger page Saul had retrieved, his jaw tightened. "That ledger," he barked. "Where is it?" "Safety deposit box," I said. "Bristow's got the key. He'll hand it over once he's conscious enough to stand without wobbling." Kramer's eyes cut to Lydia. "And her," Wolfe answered. "She is the author. Her vanity betrayed her. The rest are accomplices, tools, or victims. Take them, Inspector. Your district attorney will have ample feast." Lydia finally spoke, her voice calm but edged. "You think you've won, Wolfe, but all I did was hold up a mirror. Every one of them betrayed someone. McKellar, his clients, Bristow, his wife, Dart, her conscience. I only made them see it." Kramer growled. "Save it for the court." He motioned to his men. "Book them, all of them. Get the chauffeur, the publisher, the assistant, and especially her." The uniforms moved in. Lydia didn't resist. She stood tall, head high, as though the arrest was just another cue in her play. McKellar sputtered until Pearlie shoved him forward. Dart wept. The chauffeur cursed. In minutes the room was lighter, emptier, though the echoes of betrayal lingered like smoke. Kramer turned back to Wolfe. "You hand me the ledger and the secretary's testimony. I'll call this a solid collar, but don't think for a second you've made my life easier. Reporters will be chewing my ear off for weeks about this 5 o'clock business." "Pfui," Wolfe muttered. "If you wish to appear clever, tell them you solved it yourself." Kramer snorted, snapped for his men to move, and was gone, leaving behind only the smell of rain and uniforms. When the door closed, the house was quiet again. Helen Bristow remained, her face pale and hollow. She turned to Wolfe, her voice barely a whisper. "My husband. You said he betrayed me." Wolfe's lids drooped. "He did, madam. He sought advantage with every party. But he yet breathes. If you choose to forgive him, that is your affair. I cannot recommend it." Her tears slipped silently, and she rose, gathering her things with a stiffness that made me ache. She left without another word. The slam of the front door echoed through the hall. I looked at Wolfe. "You know, sometimes you could try sugar instead of vinegar." He exhaled, folding his hands. "Vinegar preserves." That was Wolfe's idea of consolation. By evening, Fritz had laid out sauerbraten and red cabbage, and the house had returned to its rhythm. Bristow slept upstairs, watched by Saul until Kramer could collect him in the morning. The storm of betrayal had passed, leaving the brownstone once more an island of order. I poured myself a bourbon and leaned back in my chair. So, boss, another case closed. Betrayal staged, author unmasked, pawn retrieved. You satisfied? Wolfe sipped his beer, eyes half-lidded. Archie, satisfaction is vulgar. What remains is reflection. Fine, I said. Reflect. He set the glass down, fingers steepled. Betrayal, Archie, is not an act but a habit. One may betray once by chance, but repeated betrayal is character. Each of them, McKellar, Bristow, Dart, Vance, revealed their character. It is the nature of man to conceal faults until pressure reveals them. In this case, vanity provided the pressure. Vanity betrayed them all. Except you, I said. He allowed himself the smallest of smiles. I do not betray, Archie. I indulge. That is different. I chuckled, finished my bourbon, and closed my notebook. Outside, the city ticked on, indifferent to betrayal, drama, and justice. Inside, the brownstone hummed with order again. And though Wolfe would never admit it, I knew he relished it. Not the performance Lydia had staged, but the fact that he, as always, had written the ending. The next morning was gray, the kind of colorless dawn that makes the city look like it has decided to keep its secrets under wraps. I was in the kitchen with Fritz, stealing a second cup of coffee while he frowned at me like I was dipping into state reserves, when Saul came down the stairs. He'd been on watch over Julian Bristow all night, and his face said the secretary hadn't made things easy. He's awake, Saul reported. Nervous, keeps muttering about the ledger. Says he wants Wolfe. Fritz muttered something sharp in German and shoved a plate of rolls onto the counter. I carried the coffee upstairs and into the office, where Wolfe already sat in his chair, orchids tended, breakfast demolished, and the first beer of the day at hand. The man's stomach worked like a metronome. Betrayals, kidnappings, staged theater. None of it could rearrange the schedule. Saul brought Bristow in. He looked better than he had last night. Clean shirt, Fritz's handiwork, but still pale, eyes haunted. Helen hadn't returned. That was probably merciful. Wolfe flicked his gaze over him like he was appraising a cut of meat. Sit, Wolfe commanded. Bristow obeyed, perching at the edge of the chair like a boy about to be scolded. Mr. Wolfe, I owe you my life. Pfui. Spare me. You owe me candor. Where is the ledger? Bristow swallowed. In a deposit box at Fifth National, number 2143. My name is on it. The key is... He reached into his pocket, trembling, and set a small brass key on Wolfe's desk. There. Everything's inside. McKellar's thefts, the records, the signatures. Wolfe didn't touch it. He let it lie there like an insect pinned for examination. You toyed with that ledger, promised it to Vance, to your wife, to me. You used betrayal as currency. That is contemptible. Bristow flushed. I was afraid. If I gave it to one person, the others would what? Kill you. Wolfe's voice dropped an octave. They nearly did. Your cowardice nearly accomplished their work. Bristow shrank back. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Saul leaned against the wall, arms folded. Inspector Kramer's waiting. Ledger in hand. This case will stick. Wolfe nodded slightly. Archie, go with Mr. Bristow. Retrieve it. Do not tarry. That was my errand, and I wasn't thrilled, but it beat listening to Wolfe's moral sermons. I took Bristow downtown, retrieved the ledger under the bank's suspicious eye, and hustled it back. By the time we returned, Kramer was in the office again, red-faced, puffing smoke, but his eyes lit when I dropped the heavy book on Wolfe's desk. Finally, he growled, snatching it up. This will bury McKellar, and Vance too. Wolfe inclined his head. Do not forget Dart and the chauffeur. Their lesser roles must not be excused. Betrayal festers when unpunished. Kramer grunted, stuffed the ledger under his arm, and looked at Bristow with contempt. And you? You'll be lucky to walk away with your skin. But your testimony seals the rest. Don't expect applause. Bristow sagged, muttering something about Helen. Wolfe ignored him. When Kramer left, taking Bristow along, the brownstone emptied of its turmoil. Saul departed too, his work done. The office was suddenly quiet again, only the tick of the grandfather clock, its mechanism repaired by Fritz, marking the hour. It hadn't stopped at 5 again. The symbolism was broken, like the author of it. I dropped into my chair across from Wolfe. Well, that's that. Curtain down. Betrayer unmasked, pawn rescued, ledger in the right hands. The city owes you a bow, even if Kramer won't give it. Wolfe's eyes closed, and he folded his hands. The city owes me nothing. Betrayal is as old as appetite. There will be another. There always is. Cheerful thought, I muttered. He opened his eyes, heavy-lidded, and fixed them on me. Archie, do you know why betrayal is so potent? I'm sure you'll tell me. It is the collapse of trust, the shattering of illusion. A man may be killed and the world continues, but when trust is broken, the world itself shifts. That is why Lydia Vance chose betrayal as her theatre. She wished to make her enemies feel the world tilt, but she forgot. Those who wield betrayal become its victims. She betrayed too many, and in the end, she betrayed herself. I scribbled it down in my notebook. You ever think of writing a book yourself? Something like Wolfe's Wisdom, a practical guide to betrayal and beer. His glare was eloquent enough. Evening came. Fritz laid dinner, sauerbraten again, with dumplings this time. Wolfe ate with his usual reverence, pausing only to grunt at the flavor. I poured myself bourbon and thought about Helen Bristow, gone to patch together what was left of her marriage. I thought about Lydia Vance, smug even in handcuffs, proud of her performance until the curtain fell. I thought about Julian, a pawn who had walked willingly onto the board. And I thought about Wolfe, immovable, inevitable, reshaping betrayal into judgment with nothing but words. When the plates were cleared, Wolfe leaned back, reached for another beer, and delivered the closing line of his reflection. Archie, men may betray, women may betray, nations may betray, but truth, once uncovered, does not. That is why I endure these disturbances. To restore the balance, to remind them all that vanity and betrayal end, but justice abides. I raised my glass. Well, here's to justice, then, and to a quiet week without 5 o'clock curtain calls. He didn't answer. He closed his eyes, folded his hands, and let the house settle back into its timeless rhythm. The brownstone was whole again, the case closed, betrayal laid bare. And though Wolfe would never admit it, I knew he savored it, not the chaos, not the drama, but the order restored at the end. The world had tilted at 5 o'clock. Wolfe had set it straight.